Every financial decision that I've made involves some sort of bet. Some of these bets have paid off and some of them didn't, but these bets have shaped how I make these decisions going forward. So let's go ahead and hop into how I make these decisions. Hey guys, it's Kerry, and today we're going to talk about something a little bit different, and that is about risk. Every financial decision that I have done has involved risk in one way or another. Today I want to go ahead and get into just the financial decisions that I have made that involve risk and how they have changed how I view risk for other financial decisions or even the current ones I have today and have to adjust going forward. So let's go ahead and hop into that. The first thing I want to talk about is the investment I made in my rental property, which was getting the solar panels for $59,000 and having to finance that. When I was first thinking about this, there was a couple of things. I was like, well, I know that I am taking on debt right now for this house, but it'll make the house value go up, which of course it would, but I'm not going to see that until the house gets reappraised. But the second one is that I'll be able to sell excess electricity to the grid because I'll be able to generate enough electricity to cover my needs while I have an electric car there. And I would think that tenants are not going to have electric cars, so they should be using less electricity than me. Thirdly, there was a tax credit where I'm getting 30% back and I'm able to boost my emergency fund with that. So to me, that was worth the risk. But the side that I took into account but shoved off because I thought I was going to be able to pay things down was the interest rate was 7.49%. With that being the case, that ended up making the note for the solar panels be $491 a month. What ended up happening with the rental agreements is that the rental agreements for electricity at a flat rate was only going to go for $300. So I was like, even with that being the case, I was like, well, hopefully I will be able to sell enough electricity back to the grid to make up the difference. And we saw with my rental reality episode that that was not the case. The tenant even used more electricity and had me paying $200 extra, so a $500 utility bill with the solar there. And it was one of the things where I had to learn a quick lesson there is that benefit of the solar with the electricity rates is not something I should have really considered because it only really benefits the homeowner because they have an incentive to try to get that electricity back because they'll get the refund from the utilities. On the flip side of that, I knew coming out the gate that I would be at negative cash flow on just the solar panels itself. When I didn't think about it, I was already at a slightly negative cash flow when I was renting out the house because the mortgage rate on that house is also high and I wouldn't be at break even when I'm putting the house on the rental market. So now I put the house further into negative cash flow on something that technically, yes, I bought my electricity for a certain price a day. And as the price of electricity rises, then eventually it'll start paying for itself. But like I said, I won't really see the benefit of that because I'm not living there. And it was one of the things now that I'm in this new house, I don't think it's worth it, even with some of those, even with the price of electricity rising in the future, probably to the point where me charging the amount I do for a flat rate electricity will be able to cover the investment that I made in the panels. Is still something that it was like, it's going to have me do a negative cash flow. And right now I want my real estate properties to be at a positive cash flow. And considering the environment that we have today, mortgage rates are not going down anytime soon. So I don't have any excess cash flow to be putting towards this on the rental property. I need everything to be as close to zero or cash flow positive as possible. And this was not one of the things that was going to help. It'd be different if I had the cash or had other ways to borrow money at a much cheaper rate. But putting these things all together is one of the things where I'm like, I need to think of the whole picture and not just think of long-term future because the long-term future is fine, but I still have to make it to that long-term future. The other thing I want to go ahead and get into again is brick. So we talked about brick in some of my previous episodes in the catch-up series. And it's one of the things where I've invested $15,000, and I say this all the time, I've invested $15,000, only made $68 in revenue. And that is not net. That's just all the revenue that I've actually made. So clearly I'm in the red on this company. And the thing for me here is this is my first risk that I've taken to do my own business. Most of the things I've been doing was freelance work, which is cool. And I think that's great, but it's not necessarily a full-on business. And even then, this is a franchise business that I'm doing where most of the business part of it is handled and you're really trying to get sales and make agreements to set up the franchise and do what you need to do. And one of the things that I've realized is that I do not have the skill sets required to make that business work. And for a while, I tried to still do everything myself and try to go ahead and get the business off the ground, even with the partner. Both of us didn't have the skill set that was needed. And it's one of the things where now I'm like, in order for me to understand, I need to understand going into new business ventures in the future, do I have the skill set? If I don't have the skill set, especially if I don't have the skill set nor the passion to push that business forward, then I need to figure out a way to be able to fund somebody who does have the skill I need to get this business going. And if not, then I don't need to be putting my time and effort into a business like that, because if I'm not passionate about it and I don't have the skill set for it, I don't think that I would be able to succeed in that without significantly risking other investments and things that I have put my time into to make this one come off the ground. And that's really just the thing I took away from Brick, and just learning that I need to understand the skill set that's required and be able to either acquire people who have that skill set and be able to pay them and keep them around to do a good job, or I need to have a passion to be able to learn that thing myself and be able to push it forward. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be two, because they are kind of related here. The first one I'm going to get into is the barbershop client. And with them, I ended up putting in about 16 hours of work and getting no money or not paid for it at all, which I knew was a risk going into it, because they were asking me about being able to help them with the problem. And I went ahead and researched into that problem, because it was consulting. It's kind of hard to gain somebody's trust in consulting if you don't do some type of research to understand the problem, and try to present them with or convince them with your presentation that you are able to help them solve that problem. And with that being the case, I decided to go ahead and look into it and invest that time, because this was something that I felt like I could do if I was able to put my time into it. And I think it would be a cool new skill to learn. And that's where I leveraged my time with AI to be able to help me quickly ramp up to gain this new skill and to be able to present to this client. The flip side of this, though, is that I didn't want to necessarily get this client just to keep a client because they asked me and came to me for a need. I had to set my price on something where I think it's worth me working on it if I'm getting paid the amount that's worth that time. And unfortunately, the client, I really had a decision to make. It's either I lower my price because the client wants me to lower my price, or I stand firm on my price and take the risk that the client may not go with me. And I stood firm on my price, and we see that where that decision is. But it's something where I know I feel good about it, because I would much rather them pay me my worth than for me to just take that client to be getting more money. And I could have been using that time elsewhere with other clients to earn more money doing something else that's also a need for my skill. I don't want to lock away my time and be getting paid less. To me, that doesn't make sense. Especially, I don't think that, I know I got a new skill set out of this, but I know that with my continued work for them, it's only so much that I would get out of that. And that brings me to my next point, which, not my next point, but the next thing I want to talk about that relates to this is the startup that I mentioned in the last, not the last episode, but a couple of episodes ago, was that with this startup, I told them I can only give them a limited amount of time, but I'm not getting paid for them. They told me about getting equity. And the reason I went forward with this is because the startup requires me to be like a founding engineer for them. And the experience you get from a founding engineer is far exceeding what the barber supply shop client would have given me for doing work for them. And this type of experience I can take out of that startup, be able to use for myself or be able to use for other people. A good example is when I talked about the idea my editor had in the last episode, and how we can be able to take the experience from the startup and actually help not the developer, but the editor take his idea and take it through a startup phase to be able to launch it into a business. And this type of experience, I'm able to get this experience from the startup without risking my own money, risking a bunch of my time, and just kind of being able to also gain experience that I need developer-wise from the startup itself and just being in that environment. On top of that, they did offer me equity. And the equity is great because if the startup does succeed, then I get a pretty good payout whenever I'm able to sell the stock, or I can just hold on to it. It becomes an asset of mine that I got first dibs on before the startup even went through any type of funding whatsoever. So it's two sides to that. I'm not really banking on the stock per se, But I am seeing right now that I'm able to gain experience out of this startup that will be valuable in other places, which is where I decided it's worth that time, but I'm only giving them a certain amount of time because I'm only willing to risk so much on that learning. And I still need to be able to have my time towards other business ventures that can bring me income and bring me towards my financial freedom goal as well. The last set of things I want to talk about as far as the not adventures, but the investments that I'm doing is with YouTube and real estate. And then I'm going to tie these together because I do think it's important to just see how these risks can actually intertwine with each other. So with YouTube, I am investing my time and I'm also investing $700 a month to the editor to help me save my time on the channel to go forward and be able to put out better quality content. And then I also had the one-time cost for paying for the equipment as well. And it's one of the things where for me, I think it's worth it here because I have a passion here. For my passion, I want to be able to bring my financial journey and me just being open and transparent about what I'm doing to other people so that they can be able to take my lessons or the things that I've done right and be able to apply for themselves to do either better than me, to do better than me and be able to learn from me. And then I also want to be able to grow a community around us so I can learn from you guys and we can just be a community together to uplift each other and be able to become financially free according to our own definitions, because I don't think it looks the same for everybody and it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. To move on to the next piece, because well, actually, before I even move on, with the YouTube channel, another thing I wanted to mention as well is obviously this is still a risk that I'm taking because this is $700 a month. So whatever 700 times 12 is, my editor's gonna do the math. I'm too lazy here. I'm pretty sure it's 8,400, but I could be wrong. But he'll put it on the screen. So that is how much I'm investing every year into this channel. And right now, I wouldn't say everybody knows, but right now the channel's not making me anything. I'm not monetized anywhere. And it's something that I have to continue to find a way to pay for this channel. And as I said before, I want to make sure that I'm paying my business expenses with business incomes. So this is something where I now have a responsibility to keep bringing in business income to keep this channel editor paid for so that I can continue to make content, because right now it's more than just my time going into this. And that's one thing that I have to keep in mind. It is a risk until I become monetized and nobody really knows when that would happen, right? So we know that it's going to take over a year maybe or so. And it's just one of the things I have to keep in mind, that this is an expense that I have to figure out how to keep paid. The other thing I want to go ahead and get into finally is the real estate. So with the real estate, I have two properties, right? I have this one I'm recording in, and then I have my rental property. And with the rental property, we had something happen over there, right? I had the turnover with the client. I'm saying client, but the renter ended up leaving the property early and terminating the lease early due to hardship. And with that being the case, we had to find another tenant. But even with that, I thought it was going to be a small amount of turnover. I was like, oh, we got to clean the carpets, change the locks, cool. But with that, we actually ended up finding a dishwasher didn't work, and there was water damage because the chimney had a crack in it or something like that. So we had repairs that came up, the rental turnover that came up. And because we want to make sure that we are continually having money come in, we need to find a new tenant, which means that all of these things have to be repaired right on the spot. There is no time to wait a couple months for me to get the money. And it was one of the things that took from my rental income and made a dip, and that dip had to be filled somewhere. The first thing I'm going to do, obviously, is take my business income to fund that dip. But in this scenario, it ended up being so much that it went past my business fund. And I ended up needing to pay some of it with my personal, because my business covered it fully for the most part. But then my business itself had AI expenses, and I had to cover that with my own personal money. And now it even got to the point where, unfortunately, I'm asking my editor, hey, can I pay you in a week when I get paid? Because now I don't have any money for my business account. And there is actually a third thing that happened. So a trifecta, we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but the freelance client I'm working for that I'm pulling in my business income from, basically my sole source of business income because my rental is cash flow negative, I ended up miscounting the hours, so I'm not getting a check for this month. And unfortunately, that means that I lost $3,000. Then we had the turnover from the tenant, and all of this is hitting at the same time. So now my business account doesn't have any money in it. And now I have to fund things from my personal. And it's one of the things where now I'm like, now I need to look at these risks different. With real estate, especially, we know that real estate should have some maintenance fund, or that's what I've seen on financial YouTube is you need to have a maintenance fund account, basically an emergency fund account for real estate. And it's something I didn't take seriously because I was like, oh, I'm getting in money from my client, freelance client, so it should be fine. I can always just pay it there. But now I know that I want to have a dedicated account to my real estate portfolio to where each property there is going to have its own emergency fund. Because ideally, I want to ensure that not just with real estate, but it is something that's really driving home this example. So I'll stick with it. For real estate, I want to make sure that each property has its own emergency fund. But in general, I don't want the investments that I'm making to drag each other down. So I don't want real estate to have an emergency and then that drags out all of my business investments to the point to now where it's depending on my personal as the final backstop to help keep things afloat. I would much rather have an emergency fund for real estate so it doesn't spill over into other investments. Same thing for my YouTube. I want to have some emergency fund just in case anything happens, the same way that my financial advisor tells me to have an emergency fund whenever, because not whenever, sorry, my watch distracted me because it's about to die. But I'm going to come back because that got me. But back to what we were talking about, I wanted to bring it home with an example where my financial advisor is telling me, and everybody's financial advisor pretty much tells them to have an emergency fund in case you lose your job. And I want to do the same thing when it comes to my freelance income and the expenses that it's paying for. Just in case I lose that source of income for whatever reason, I should be able to at least go to 2-3 months without it, or whatever threshold I want to give myself, to where one check being missed doesn't throw everything off. And that's something that I want to also do for that side of my business, the freelance side, in addition to the real estate side. Because right now I'm almost done. We're almost done. Me and my wife are almost done with the emergency fund side on the personal side, but it's something I didn't think about for my business where it also needs the same thing. And that's one of my takeaways on this for the real estate along with YouTube, is just making sure that if I'm going to take these risks, I need to be able to weather the storm, because these risks are risks. Something can happen and probably will happen. So let's give ourselves a chance to be able to weather the storm if something does happen, or really when. Putting this all together, I really want to close out with my main takeaways, because when I started this channel, and not even when I started this channel, but when I started my financial journey at 21, and you can really see that going back and looking at my previous videos, I was mainly concerned about getting into real estate, getting my first property, because I always talked about that with my mom, but I also made a conscious decision that I want to reward myself when I got my first job, ended up getting a car. And when I got the car, I didn't think nothing about anything but the payment, so that I can qualify for the payment to get the car. But when I was like, oh, I can qualify for the payment, be a little bit responsible, I can pay the car note and be fine and get around. Well, I'd even factor in the car insurance, and the car insurance is another 40 to 50% on top of the car note. And now it's evolved with all of these things that I've learned, to the point where with big financial purchases, I am not only considering the interest rate on the loan and how much the actual note ends up coming out to be, but I want to also consider all of the things around it that can influence how easy or hard it is to pay that note, and just understanding, if I'm making a big purchase like that, what benefit is it getting me, to the point where we can see not even just long-term, but short-term, how I'm going to weather the storm to get to the long-term benefit if I already have that planned in mind. The other thing I want to go ahead and not get into, but wrap up about as well, is that investing is not only done through money, it's done through time as well. So the thing that I really want to nail home here for myself and also for you guys is that with time, you want to make sure that your time is used in a valuable way. So that is why with the barber supply client, I did not lower my price, because I don't want my time to not be used in the best way. If somebody's gonna be paying me for my service, I need to make sure that they're competitive with what I could be using that time for. And if I am getting to a point where I'm okay with somebody not paying me for the work that I'm doing, then I need to get something else out of it that is going to benefit me far greater than me getting money for the time I'm spending right then and there with them, which is why I think the equity deal, along with me being a founding engineer at a startup, is worth the experience rather than saying that I want to get paid whatever the price may be per hour as a contractor to get this type of work done for this client. The last thing that I want to really hammer home here is just making sure that when I have a lot of different investments going on, whether that be through assets, through my time, through money, or whatever the case may be, I want to ensure that these investments do not collide with each other like they did for me with real estate. I want to ensure, to the best of my ability, I know I can't predict all expenses that will happen, but I want to make sure that the investment that I'm making in or the risk that I'm taking don't domino through and take all of the other ones down, especially my business adventures. I want to make sure that, to the best of my ability, my business adventures never touch my personal, because the last thing I want to do is rob myself of retirement because of the business risks that I'm taking. And even within the business risks on their own, I want to ensure that they're insulated from each other as best I can. So that way, so when something happens with one, it doesn't affect the other to a certain degree, or at least not immediately. That'll do it for me for this episode. I'll see you guys next week. And I highly encourage you to watch the catch-up series that I have if you are not familiar with some of these adventures that I'm talking about, or investments or risks that I'm talking about. In this video, you'll have the complete picture of how they even came to be and how they flow together and how I ended up being in position to take these risks. And then I also encourage you to watch the Plan series. It's only one episode right now, but it'll show you how everything I've done in the catch-up series goes together and what my thinking was overall and how it evolved over time to keep these things going in the direction that I want. But as usual, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'm curious, for those who have taken big risks, what were your big risks and what did you learn from these risks? And as usual, I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching Make His Financial Journey YouTube channel. Peace.